Thank you for that very kind and flattering introduction. I hope nobody is here under the misapprehension that I am either A, a celebrity, I'm not, or B, that I'm an expert on China, because I'm certainly not that either, nor am I an expert on the terracotta warriors. But I do have some things to say about it, and some things to say about why I think you're all here tonight, why I think there are so many more people looking at this exhibition, coming to this exhibition. I was just having a conversation with some of the museum or the gallery's staff here, and they were commenting on the fact that this exhibition is drawing such an extraordinary range of people who they don't often see in the museum. And I think if you look around you tonight, and you look around you, the people who are gathered outside and milling in and out and walking down the stairs, you'll see that there's something about this exhibition that is causing quite a buzz, that is causing interest among people who might not, if we could say this, might not otherwise be coming to the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And on the face of it, that shouldn't be surprising. It's an extraordinary exhibition. It's one that has a very personal story, as many of you will know, or I'm sure everyone will know, with the man responsible for this exhibition and bringing it here, Edmund Capon. He's had a very long engagement with the discovery even of or the unearthing of the terracotta warriors. And this is probably, you can't think of any other sort of better reward for somebody to mount this exhibition after all of his years of studying and engagement with China and Chinese art and with the gallery. So congratulations to Edmund personally, and also to Richard Johnson, who's responsible for, I think, what is the remarkable way the warriors and the other artifacts are exhibited. There's some very clever things that I'm sure you've noticed with the mirrors on the ceilings, allowing you to see the detail, and the mirrors, and the platform of mirrors, things that are suggesting something about the warriors' original environment in the tomb of Qin Shi Huang. And the rivers of mercury that we've read about, and the situation that these poor warriors found themselves in, buried deep beneath the earth. But so why am I here? Who am I, and what do I have to do with, why am I being asked to speak about the warriors? As you heard, I am the artistic director of the Sydney Writers' Festival. We've got a festival coming up in May. And as soon as I'm finished with my talk here, I'm going to race back to the office to try to finish that festival so it can get printed in the Herald in time without any mistakes. It's an extraordinary feat. The festival is an incredible institution, and I'm very, very lucky to have anything to do with it, much less be the person who gets to decide who speaks at it and the topics they get to speak on. It's an event that happens annually, the third week of May. This year it's the 16th to the 22nd of May. It features over 300 events in the Walsh Bay precinct, which you all have heard about a lot recently, as being a lot of focus is being put on the Walsh Bay precinct, particularly by Kate Blanchett and Andrew Upton at Sydney Theatre Company, in really putting focus on that as our key arts precinct in Sydney. So it takes place down there in the venues of the Sydney Theatre Company, the Sydney Dance Company, the Bangarra Dance Theatre, and other places, including Pier 2-3. The wharf that you might have read quite a bit in the news, read about lately. So over 300 events, over 400 participants, all taking place in 1 week. We get about 80,000 attendances a year. And I'd like to just say something a bit about what the festival means to me and what I think it means to Sydney. Sure, it's a lot of people gathering together to talk about their books, to talk about their ideas. Some of them to sell books, some of them to offer the opportunity to get to meet them and sign books. But it's about something more than that. I think it's something that I think is absolutely critical and always has, to my mind, been critical to the way our society works, and that is to allow a plurality of voices to speak on any given topic, to allow a freedom of expression and a free exchange of ideas. If we just leave this to those who are in control, those who are our politicians, those who are our elected representatives, be they parliamentarians, or be they city councilors, or be they members of parliament in our state government, we'd be in trouble. And what a festival does is allows interaction between informed voices who are writers who have thought about these issues, and people such as yourself to engage with them, to ask questions, to come with preconceived notions, to open up your mind to things you might not have thought about, to test your assumptions, to learn something new, to enjoy it while you're doing it, and maybe rethink the way you live, maybe rethink the way you engage with your world around you. There are so many pressing concerns in our world today. There always are, but I think now in particular there are. And those pressing concerns include what's happening with our environment, what's happening with our climate, what's happening with the economy, what's happening with some of the geopolitical power shifts that are happening in the world. And I'll get back to that in a minute, because I think one of those issues might be one of the things that's causing an increased interest in this exhibition and exhibitions like it. And so when you've got these pressing concerns, we do need to open up our minds, and we do need to open up that opportunity to have somebody influence us or have somebody teach us something we don't know. And so that's why I think we play a really critical role in Sydney and in Sydney's intellectual and cultural life. The festival's always had an engagement with China, or as long as I can remember. We've always had Chinese writers come. We've had writers such as Mo Yan, Bei Dao, Bei Ling. Just last year we had Su Tong, who had just won the Man Asian Literary Prize. So some of the finest writers from China have come to the festival, and we've been very proud to present them. But I want to just speak a little bit before I get on to the Warriors, a little bit more about what the role of the writer in society is. For me, you've heard that I've been an advocate of free expression, an activist for free expression, although I always wonder about that word activism. I actually have never organized a demonstration or organized a march. The activism that I've been involved in has consisted of having meetings with other writers. And sometimes that's been considered something that's been controversial. But just back to that role of the writer in China, I think what's always motivated me, I always go back to the quote from Milan Kundera, the Czech writer, from the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, when he said, "The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting." And something that you can add to that is that actually encapsulates the role of the writer, particularly the role of a writer in a society that's in transition, a society that's in economic and political transition. We all know what happened in the Czech Republic. We all know what happened to Milan Kundera. He was thrown out of the Communist Party a number of times. He's somebody who advocated reform of the Communist Party, but nevertheless, in the end, gave up, left, was exiled to Paris, was stripped of his Czech citizenship. He's somebody that, in fact, fought with Václav Havel about the reform and the proper approach for change in Czechoslovakia at the time. And Václav Havel favored a more radical approach, and Kundera favored a reformist approach. So a lot of intellectuals in the Czech Republic had split. And Milan Kundera eventually came to the conclusion that the reformist road wasn't going to work, and that an absolute end to that regime needed to take place, but he unfortunately wasn't part of it. But that idea, the struggle of man against power, is a struggle of memory against forgetting. It's the struggle to ensure that what we know is the truth remains the truth, that another truth doesn't take its place, that after time, when something can't be said over and over again, another truth takes its place, and the real truth, gets lost. And so that's one of the reasons why a writer is incredibly important, and an institution like the Sydney Writers' Festival is incredibly important to society. But so why China? You've heard that I've lived in China. I didn't live there for 10 years, but I'd been a visitor on and off. I've lived there, I think, a total of 3 years. I studied Chinese late in life, and It happened late in life, partly when I moved here to Australia from the United States. I sort of got caught up. It was in the early 90s, and if you all recall, Paul Keating was Prime Minister. There was a new emphasis about Australia engaging with its geography rather than with its history, was the way it was put. There was a big push for Australia to own the fact that it was actually sitting in Asia and that it should really be engaging with Asia, and that Asia is where Australia's future was going to be, rather than its cultural and historical links with Europe and indeed with the United States. And I think we're seeing that come to fruition, that the future is here, as if we can say. We're all very much aware in the news every day of the extraordinary growth and economic growth of China. And with that growth comes, as I said, forecasted before, a shift in geopolitical power. And I guess in terms of speculating why everyone's here and why all these people have come to this exhibition, I think that's one of the things driving it. I think more and more people want to understand China. More and more people want to figure out what kind of role China might play in the world. More and more people want to see what actually is the best approach for Australia to take with China. And that, if I could just forecast, is going to be some of the ideas that we're going to be talking about at the Sydney Writers' Festival in May. And so we've got the Warriors. We've got this extraordinary exhibition that's been sent here. I think it's probably one of the largest representations of the Warriors that's been allowed to leave China, if I'm correct on that. And we've seen the extraordinary craftsmanship. We've been given an insight into, I think, everything about Chinese ancestral religion, Chinese, traditional Chinese state power, feudalism. Almost everything is in that room downstairs, encapsulated in this exhibition. We see these warriors there, and when you go to Xi'an in China, of course, I don't know how many of you have been to Xi'an to see the warriors there in situ. You see, of course, the hundreds of them in the pit. And it is extraordinary. It's extraordinary to think that these hundreds all have individual faces. They're individual people. They're not just something that's been stamped out and put in line, which could have so easily been done, and probably would have been the approach in modern times. Almost certainly would have been the approach if one were to conceive of such a thing today. And again, going back to that idea of what a Writers' Festival is, a Writers' Festival is there to ensure, along with our newspapers and our books and every other part of what's called the publishing and writing industry, is to ensure there's a plurality of voices and a diversity of voices. And so I think, downstairs we've got at least a plurality and a diversity of faces. We have individuals down there. We have individuals looking at us across the time and across the era. And we also have what this brings to us, and what anyone who goes around China and talks to everyday people on the street, sort of extraordinary myth and superstition surrounding the warriors. And it never ceases to amaze me that when you're operating in a different culture from your own, certain things are shown in relief. Now, if I were to go into the United States or anywhere here in Australia, you're going to find superstitious people wherever you go. And there are superstitions and ideas about spirituality, or ideas about the real causes of things. You'll find that in every culture, but I think when you're operating in another language and when you're trying to figure out another people and you're trying to engage with another people, some of those superstitions actually strike you as being rather odd. I'll never forget when I was talking to an academic at one of the most prestigious universities in Beijing, and he was worried about the curse of Xi'an. He was worried about the fact, that there were rivers of mercury that were in the tomb of Qin Shi Huang and in any other, numerous tombs that are yet to be excavated in Xi'an. And he was concerned not only about the environmental contamination of Xi'an from that mercury, but concerned about the spirit of the interrupted dead, the dead that the tombs that are being opened and the spirits that were being let out. And was somebody at Tsinghua University, somebody who's, at the pillar of education, the MIT of China or the Cambridge of China. This isn't somebody you'd be expecting to find these superstitious beliefs. But as I said before, I imagine if I went and spoke with somebody at Harvard, you'd probably hear them say superstitious beliefs that just sound completely normal to you. But it's quite an extraordinary thing, as I said, when you're in another culture and you're hearing this. The other thing I just want to mention about the warriors, and one of the things that I think is very important about them is the symbol that they send. Now, nations have symbols. Australia has any number of symbols. Sometimes Australia bemoans the fact that it's saddled with the symbol of the Anzacs, if you can believe it. I think it's a very proud symbol, but some Australians question whether that is a celebration of a defeat and what that says about how Australia views itself in the world. The United States often has some of the most appalling symbols representing itself, some of its violent movies, some of its political figures. Sarah Palin can somehow be seen as a symbol of the United States. And one worries about the representation of a country when it goes across the seas and presents itself to the world. Now, many of you, everybody's probably familiar with the notion of soft power, a term developed by Joseph Nye, one of the great grand men of international relations and international relations theory. And soft power, of course, is the way that a nation asserts itself in the world. It's not with missiles and guns. It's not even necessarily with economic might. It's with something that attracts you to that nation. It's the United States. It's the Oscars. It's really good films. It's usually excitement about celebrity. It's those things that give that nation power that, as I said, that isn't expressed through normal international relations channels. Now, with China, I'd like to offer some speculation about what its soft power is in the world. China actually has been very consciously, the Chinese government is very consciously casting about for what sort of symbols can represent China, what can get you excited about China. And I think it's probably pretty clear that these warriors are part of that. They're here due to the great work of Edmund Capon, but I'd put it to you, they're made available to send a message about China. It's a very conscious message about where China is right now and where China has been. And I think you'll all agree it's an incredibly powerful message that's being sent. It's a message of a country and a civilization that has been in existence for 5,000 years at least. A language that has developed over time that can be traced back 5,000 years. This is an extraordinary thing, if you think about it. If you think about the history of the English language, or you think about the history of any of the countries we're talking about here, that this is a civilization that extends back in time. It's a civilization that back at this time of Qin Shi Huang was producing something of this level of detail, this level of artisanship. It says so much about where this civilization has come from. But what does it say about where China is today? And what does it say about where the world in relation to China is today? And what does it say about where Australia is in relation to China? I think in some respects a nation can't really choose its symbols. You don't get to choose its symbols. You put forward what you're proud of and what's unique about you, and then those symbols can then are really subject to interpretation by people around the world. The interpretation of those symbols can't really be controlled, can't really be directed. And I just want to play a bit with the idea of what these warriors might mean. They're warriors. They're warriors, and I'm not saying for a minute that there's an invasion going on, but it is an expression of might. It is an expression, if you will, of China's power. And everywhere you turn right now, there are questions about China's power. You'll read Hugh White's quarterly essay, where he talks about the choice that Australia faces, whether we choose to stay with America or whether we choose to go with China. Now, I would posit that we really shouldn't have to make that choice, that Australia should be completely independent and Australia should be able to choose a path that benefits Australia and that honors Australian values and that honors where it is we want our country to be and the sort of values that we want to represent. And Australia actually could benefit extraordinarily by this dance between the two nations, between the two emerging superpowers. And so I say, a nation can't choose its symbols, and so China has this extraordinary wealth of symbols that aren't necessarily, I would put it, in China's best interest at the moment. The Great Wall, again, another extraordinary example of Chinese technology and ingenuity, and again, of this incredible history, this incredible civilization. But I always recall one of the things that attracted me to China was what was happening in the late 80s. The extraordinary explosion of idealism and hope and minds that were reaching out for new ideas, minds that wanted to question what was happening in China at the time, people that wanted things to change, and people who were ready to stand up and demand, ask, beg, plead, make the case for those changes. And I recall a documentary that was made in 1987 called Heshang, which I think is translated often to River Elegy. And it looks at those symbols of China, and it was a startling, and it was the documentary equivalent of the student or the man who threw the ball of paint at the portrait of Mao Zedong in Tiananmen Square in 1989. It was an assault on what China was choosing to represent itself. It said that the Great Wall was not the best symbol for China to rally around, but that it was instead a noose around China's neck. I believe, I'm actually working on really bad memory at the time, but it was those sort of startling claims. It was taking the symbols of China and sort of turning them on their head, and it was all part of that fervent time when the students in particular, but all of Chinese society was, they called it, was it xi xue re, which was this fever of studying the West, the heat and fever of studying the West. And so it was a time of where Chinese students and academics were just absorbing ideas from all over the world, but particularly from the West, and trying to find out how these ideas could be incorporated in all the extraordinary economic changes that were happening with the reform and opening up era in the 80s. So that's the thing that was happening in China that drew my interest and that made me say rather late in life, I want to learn more. I want to study Chinese. I want to find out what is making that tick. I was completely turned on by that diversity and plurality of voices that were opening up. Again, diversity and plurality, essential to any society to find its way, essential for any society to succeed. And I guess one of the things that, as a student of Chinese, and I have to say not a very good student, as I said at the beginning, I am no expert, but one of the things I think I find most disappointing about what's happening in China right now with its growth, with this extraordinary economic growth, and I don't mean to say for a minute that I don't admire what the changes that are taking place there. I think what I find is that I think a lot of that energy, that hope, and that idealism that was so inspiring in the 80s, in the late 80s, has gone quiet. Its complaints are muttered or softly spoken, but the public voice in China seems to be singing as one, and it's a voice about economic growth. It's a voice about personal security, personal financial security. I mean, all of this is completely understandable, but nevertheless disappointing that all that energy and all that enthusiasm seems to be channeled or seems to be muffled. with the exception of an extraordinarily active and brave and courageous, but very small group of people who continue to carry that flame or carry that torch, if you will, that torch of freedom. And so with all this success and with China's growth, I look at all the opportunities. I look at how we're going to be able to see more exhibitions like this. I thrill at the idea that school children in Australia and the United States are learning Chinese from a very young age. It's just become a matter of course. It's like when I'm growing up in Texas, I studied Spanish, or many of you might have studied French, or Chinese is becoming, Mandarin is becoming the language of choice. It's just a natural thing, and that's going to be provide us a deeper and more nuanced engagement with Chinese culture and Chinese politics, and can only be for the better for both us and for China. But I do get concerned that with our focus, with the focus in China on economic growth and economic statistics, and with our focus here in Australia on what economic gains we can get out of our relationship with China, that there's a whole other aspect to the relationship that doesn't get discussed. There's a whole other aspect of an improving quality of life in China that doesn't get discussed. There are frustrations that bubble away underneath the surface, and I go back again to the warriors. And these warriors, as I said earlier on, all have individual faces, and all were not made out of some factory stamp. And I guess what I long for is that these individual faces will be joined by the individual voices. I want to hear what the warriors have to say. Thank you.